to see a new generation of young folks coming in, college students and young professionals, new families, and to see them kind of come into the church and breathe life into the church and not be afraid to put the faith to the test and to ask the hard questions.
Yeah.
It's really refreshing.
Well, yeah, that's right. It's refreshing and it's revitalizing. Hello and welcome to Candid, where we never settle for less than the truth. I'm your host, Dr. Jonathan Youssef. Each week we'll tackle tough issues, answer your hard questions, and take a candid look at the Christian faith. Today my guest is Jaime Owens. He is a graduate of Southern Seminary. He's worked at Capitol Hill Baptist Church with Mark Dever, and he is the pastor of Tremont Temple in Boston, Massachusetts, and people may not be familiar with that building, but I promise you by the end of this interview, you will not forget this building. It is of great historical significance, and we'll get into that in a little bit. But I just wanted to say, Jaime, thank you for taking the time to join us on Candid Conversations.
Thank you, Jonathan. It's a joy to be here with you, brother.
Yeah. Well, Jaime, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? You're a Massachusetts guy, born and raised. Our listeners are global, so maybe fill in the picture a little bit for us and what it was like growing up, and we'll go from there.
Sure, yeah. Jonathan, I was a born and bred New Englander. Grew up in a small town called Swansea, about an hour south of Boston, closer to Providence, Rhode Island. And grew up Roman Catholic, very committed to the forms of it, with not a whole lot of reality and understanding of who God is and the faith. And, I was just kind of involved in all types of things like sports. I was an Eagle Scout, maybe a typical suburban kid, mama's boy, involved in sports and all the rest. And, throughout high school, I began to depart from my Catholic roots. My parents, after my going through the motions and my confirmation, said, hey, you can take this further. They kind of gave us a choice. And so I, as a freshman in high school, kind of left it behind and began to be more interested in sports and popularity and just partying on the weekends. And my life was kind of a double-sided life, one of appearing to be a good boy, but on the other side, partying and living a typical kind of lifestyle in high school, discovering all those different things. Yeah. And so high school went through that. I wanted to be a police officer from as long as I can remember, a state trooper or go into federal law enforcement. And so I graduated high school. I went to Bridgewater State University. I played 4 years of football as a linebacker. I was a track captain. I, again, continue just to kind of see myself as a pretty good person. I think I would describe myself spiritually as a deist at the time. Okay. I thought God existed, but he was far removed.
He doesn't care about us.
Exactly, yeah. So he kind of set it up and then kind of bounced. And so I lived that way. And then my junior year, I was living with a bunch of athletes from the football team and track teams and just drinking throughout the week and getting our studies, but enjoying kind of a me-centered life. And it was on winter break of 2004 that I went home to Swansea, and I went to the gym there, Gold's Gym, and walking on a treadmill next to a young lady I wanted to talk to. I wanted to see if I could strike up conversation, maybe get a date. And it was going well. And then at the end of the conversation, the hook, my dad is a pastor of a church in town. Would you come in here and preach? And so I ended up at church. Several weeks later, still hungover from the night before. I drove the 40 minutes back to my hometown, went to church. People were strange. They were lifting up their hands in worship. I'd never seen anything like that in the Roman Catholic Church.
Yeah, not very Catholic.
No, not at all. And so I was a little weirded out, but some of the men there quickly made a beeline over and started asking pretty meaningful questions. And then, of course, the girl was there. And so I kept going back and Sunday after Sunday. And the preaching of the word became real to me over those months. I would go back to my apartment. I started to feel the conviction of the Holy Spirit and the drawing of the Spirit, where I felt filthy in my sin and began to recognize that God is real, that God is holy. And it all came to a head Father's Day of '05. I've been going there several months, and for once there was a prop up on the stage. It was a print of Rembrandt's The Return of the Prodigal Son, beautiful painting. Yeah. And as this woman's father was preaching, the pastor, I was just staring at this painting, and I knew that I'd wasted my life. I had sinned against my Heavenly Father, who's so good to me. I looked at the painting and saw the frayed clothing and the pigpen life that he had lived, and I came to the knowledge of Christ. I believe that day it was dramatic as far as just my understanding. There was a great shift in my understanding of myself before God. And I believe that day I was saved. And
wow.
Yeah, praise the Lord. It was incredible experience. I continued to walk with Christ. And in the early years, it wasn't easy. There were some things that right away the Lord took away. I think of Isaiah 6, where he touches the prophet's mouth, and he says, he declares, I'm a man of unclean lips, and Peter as well. That was one of my, I think, prominent sins, is that I had quite a potty mouth and very creative with profanity, and the Lord took that away right away. But there were other things that clung to me, and it's been extraordinary to see how the Lord's grace just washing away my temptations in many ways prior, but also I continue today to walk with Christ and be an imperfect disciple seeking to be more humble and more repentant. So that's a story. Yeah.
It's a profound conversion. The Lord uses all kinds of things. And so you finished university, you've gone into law enforcement, but then it seems like the Lord had a special call on your life to go into ministry.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so I worked a midnight shift for 2 years. On my third year, I worked days. But the midnight shift was from midnight to 8. And then sometimes you would string it out with a detail. And so you go from all the way till 12 noon or something. And these just being stretched physically. But I would always be able early in the morning to flip on the radio and listen to some good preaching. And I was really, as an infant Christian, fed on John MacArthur's preaching ministry. It was just Bible intake. It was just so intense. But also Dr. Youssef as well, which is the interesting intersection here when we all got introduced to recollect those days when I used to listen to your dad preaching in my police car before I left policing.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing. So what did the call into ministry look like? I mean, was that a very abrupt thing or a sort of long played out? Or
it began just, being invited at the church where I was converted, sharing my testimony with the youth and then the college age ministry, and then doing some things up front, and enjoyed it. But then, there was a dinner and there were some young pastors from the church. One was the youth pastor, one was the college age pastor. And we had a dinner, and the point of the dinner was to tell me that they think I should resign from policing and go into ministry full time. And it was a shock.
That's a big shift.
It wasn't something that I saw myself doing. I felt, I have a lucrative job. I have this, career path, and this is a huge shift. And so for the next year, taught a Bible study in the church and prayed about it, and people in the church encouraged me. And I thought I saw some fruit from the Bible study, and just people in my life that I was surprised encouraged me to do it. And so year 3 of policing, suppose I had been converted about 4 years. It's kind of early. I made a transition, and I ended up moving down to Louisville, Kentucky to Southern Seminary. And that's the transition into ministry.
And so you studied at Southern, and you did about half of your Master's of Divinity there, and then you got linked up with Washington D.C. and Mark Dever, and you were working at Capitol Hill Baptist for a while.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I'm in Louisville, Kentucky. I'm the security supervisor because of my police background. I was
that was a no-brainer.
I've got the chops, paid for some of my MDiv, and I worked overnights. And T4G 2010 hit the town, and I was hoping to go hear some of my favorite preachers. And my supervisor said, "You're not going there. We're working doubles here." And so I was a little ticked off. I had a little bee in my bonnet there, but I ended up working a detail at Dr. Moeller's house and at the president's house. And I was standing outside, and all the speakers have a dinner on Wednesday night. And the speakers rolled out, and I didn't really know who Mark Dever was. I had heard maybe one sermon. I knew that he put together the conference. And he came up and chatted me up, and he said, I know you're not from here. I know your accent. I went to Gordon Conwell. You're from New England. What are you doing here? I said, well,
Fish out of water.
Yeah, I'd love to go plant a church back in New England. And one of his interns reached out to me, and then that was the beginning of conversations. And then he invited me at the end of the week to come and be an intern there. So moved to D.C. 2011 in January. And then shortly after I arrived as an intern, offered me to serve him as his assistant for the next 2 years. And so, I'm just at all the meetings, sitting at the elders meetings, buying plane tickets and handling travel for him personally. And it was just drinking out of the fire hose of ministry, the real practical side of it, and just chipped away at my MDiv while I was there. So
I'm guessing you're probably learning about church planting all in that process.
Oh, sure. Yeah. I think somewhere along the lines when I was in Washington, D.C., I was playing with the idea of revitalization as well.
Yeah.
I talked to so many pastors during that time that had gone into some unhealthy situations and had brought about health and life. And there was really a renewed focus at Capitol Hill Baptist Church and Nine Marks Ministries, which sprung out from it, on ecclesiology, which is something that I didn't really pay attention to prior to going there.
Yeah.
I just thought it was, it's all about the gospel. Maybe there's a few footnotes in the New Testament about how to do church. And I was under that impression because I hadn't really studied deeply. But I was cured of that pretty quickly. And the internship really showed me the importance of church polity and sound ecclesiology to guard the gospel. Almost like the setting of a ring guards a diamond.
Yes.
Break a prong off, you can lose the diamond. You can almost lose the gospel if you're not honoring scripture and as to how to, be a church.
And so that kind of brings us to our next sort of topic, which is this Tremont Temple. It's this iconic historic building in the heart of Boston, surrounded by all the major colleges in the area. I was not familiar with the building, and then I started reading a little bit about it, and I thought, I'm a history major. How do I not know anything about this? As much as you know, tell us a little bit about Tremont Temple and its history, and then we'll come to that intersection of church planting.
It's funny you said as much as I know, and that is true because there's a lot that I don't know about the church.
I figured there's probably a lot, very few of us would know just with the age of the church, et cetera.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I didn't know anything about it before I went and met the senior pastor prior to becoming the associate pastor.
Right.
And I didn't even know what it looked like on the inside. So I grew up going to Boston. Nobody sees the inside of this building. I mean, it's like the best kept secret. It's gorgeous. Yeah. It's unique.
Yeah.
So I'm an associate pastor at a church called Grace Harbor, which is where I landed right after Capitol Hill Baptist.
Okay. Kevin
McKay, the senior pastor there, had a little circuit out in the Cape. He went out there and preached at a church. And it was actually the church was pastored by the son of the current pastor at Tremont at the time, this guy, John Paul. And so they met up for dinner, and John Paul said, hey, you mind if my dad comes by? He's the pastor of this Tremont Temple. You guys have never met. It would be fun to introduce you guys. So they have dinner. And Denton, he mentions to the two young guys at the table, his son and Kevin, hey, I've been looking for an assistant. I've been on the search. I haven't been able to find somebody. Do you guys know of anybody who could be an assistant to me at the church? And they both, from their own recollection, said my name almost at the same time. I had landed in Providence, and I was hoping to plant a church in New Bedford, Massachusetts. Yeah. But what ended up happening is I went down there and prayed, and I was raising my own support partially for my time at Grace Harbor. Mm-hmm. And it was just a thing it didn't seem like my forte, like raising funds and the life of a church planter. And so that's I thought,
challenging. Yeah,
I'm not sure I'm a planter. I don't know what I'm going to do here. And so, it was very timely for Kevin to come back and say, hey, look, I had this dinner and I want to show you a couple pictures. So he pulls out his phone. He shows me the inside of Tremont Temple. I'm like, where is that? Is that in like Florence, Italy? Where is it?
Yeah,
it's so beautiful. Right. And he goes, no, downtown Boston. And I said, really? And he said, well, who do you think would be a good fit here for a pastor? And I was naming some names. And he said, what about you? And I said, you're crazy. So I ended up going and meeting Denton, and we hit it off. He was in his mid-70s. I was 30.
Yeah.
And yet we laughed together from the very beginning. And he had two sons who were both pastors in the ministry, one in Hamburg, Germany, and then one in the Cape, the one that Kevin parlayed with before I came on.
Yeah.
And so every time like I would do something, on staff with him that he would kind of shake his head at, he would say, "You're just like my sons. You're just like my sons." So it was kind of fun. We had that like reference point where, his sons were kind of reformed and he was a little more ecumenical in a way.
Gotcha.
So it was very interesting. Had some connection there. But yeah, so I came on and then I was the assistant or associate pastor for 2 years. And then Denton declared that, it's time for me to move on, and really, advocated for me with the congregation. And there were some concerns that I was too young. Most of the pastors that had gone through there in the previous years were at least, 50 plus in age, and many letters after their names. And Denton himself was the general secretary of the Baptist World Alliance. So he's more of like a CEO of like a major Baptist association across the world. He was, So it was interesting. And yet, it was really good that, there was some pause at the beginning, I think, because in the bylaws of the church, it was like, when there's a vacancy for the pastor, the senior pastor, a diligent search must occur. And so they did that. And there were, maybe a couple hundred applications that went in. Wow. They whittled it down to 6 people, big formal interview at the Parker House Hotel. I'm wearing a suit. I'm like, you guys know me. This is funny. But it was down to 6, and they ended up choosing the internal candidate. They chose me to be the next lead pastor. Yeah. And that was just what a blessing. And yet, like as I came in, and what I talk about now a lot is church revitalization. There were, I think, many things that were, in my view, biblically needing change in the church. And yet, it's like you come into a situation and you're not like, the expert coming in and saying to these people who love Jesus, like, hey, you know what? You're doing it all wrong. Let me tell you how to do it. I got the answers, So you have to, I think, be really, careful and approach it gingerly, I would say. Yeah. And so it began, in 2017, around June, Mark came and preached my installation, and then it began that chapter.
Well, for those who don't know, Tremont Temple has had the likes of Abraham Lincoln, Frederick Douglass. It hosted an Egyptian mummy that was on display in the 1850s, Daniel Webster, Ralph Waldo Emerson, Harriet Beecher Stowe, D.L. Moody, Charles Dickens read from The Christmas Carol at Tremont Temple. In terms of historical significance, the church is really, it's unbelievable. And it was really booming. It was one of the first racially integrated churches in Boston, at least, maybe even beyond that. And it suffered through fires. It suffered through all kinds of things. It was a booming church at one point, and then kind of as you described, Jaime, it suffered at the hands of, people who didn't understand ecclesiology. They didn't understand the purpose of the church. They didn't understand the gospel, perhaps in many cases. And the congregation really died down to almost 70 or so people. And so what you've done in coming in, and maybe your predecessor, is sort of begin this process of revitalization, right? And there's something so exciting about that. Tell us a little bit about the Boston area. I mean, if you were to sort of, lick your finger and stick it in the wind, what's the cultural milieu of the area?
Oh, sure. I mean, like largely secular, the universities, the business culture, the medical culture. There's this great monument. It's called the Ether Memorial. It's in the Boston Public Garden, which mirrors the Common. Yeah. And there's this beautiful, like this obelisk, this monument, and it has it's a commemoration. Mass General Hospital developed around the time of the Civil War, the ether, which would, it's the first where you would have a surgery and you would have anesthesia, right? It's like the first, right. But etched into it in the stone are scripture passages. This is from the Lord. And I love taking people there and just showing them that because, it was just a given at that time, right, that God is the one who's the primary cause of all good, including medical advancement, yes. Right?
Right.
But now we have, a hubris and a human pride where we take credit for every good thing we do, and any advancements it's man's brilliance. And so,
I think we're modern now.
Yeah, I think there's a culture of just self-aggrandizement. I would say, all of us are believers, included myself, right? Have a tendency towards that. But, Boston culture seems, the Brahmin culture, there's, just down the street is Beacon Hill, one of the wealthiest neighborhoods in the country, zip codes in the country. And then Back Bay, it's very gilded, and just all around us, there's wealth and there's status, and also the Boston Common, which is just a melting pot. We go out there and share the gospel, and we're meeting people from every different walk of life. Muslims challenging us on the Christian hope, on the Trinity. And so it is a melting pot of ideas too, as well. So,
where are you finding good soil? Having, ministered around the world, I've seen places where people are really hungry. They're in a position where they're ready to receive. They've tried everything else and nothing's working for them, and they're ready to try the next thing. And, little do they realize that this is the thing they've been waiting for.
Yeah, I think surprisingly, a younger generation, some college students, some young professionals are coming into the church, interested in spiritual things, wanting like a cerebral understanding of the faith, to understand the answer the questions, the doubts, and kind of put the faith to the test. So they're inquisitive, these students that come in, they want to talk, they want to have lunch, they want to talk about different things. And it's refreshing, because there are a segment of people who are just, they've just gone to church their whole lives and they don't question a thing. They just show up. This is what we do. We're in the motions.
Right.
And to see a new generation of young folks coming in, college students and young professionals, new families, and to see them kind of come into the church and breathe life into the church and not be afraid to put the faith to the test and to ask the hard questions. It's really refreshing.
Well, yeah, that's right. It's refreshing and it's revitalizing, as you said, for those who maybe have never put their faith to the test. And it's probably faith, right? There's faith there, but it's not deep. It only goes so far. But then you see, especially a younger generation coming in who's asking hard questions and want to know the answers. Sometimes I hear young people ask questions and I think, I didn't ask that until I was probably in seminary. It's like, you're asking this at a young age. And now it's making me, not necessarily feel shameful, but I need to investigate this. I want to have that inquisitive nature like they do. And I want to be able to help them. I want to be able to be equipped to give a right response, a helpful response for the hope that is within us, right? As Peter tells us. It's also exciting. And, you'll have our prayers as Tremont Temple continues to grow and revitalize in that Boston area. You do have an event coming up on October 24th of 2025 and October 25th. And there's a bit of a emphasis on reaching college students on the 24th. And then you have a special guest coming on the 25th. Do you have any information you want to share about that?
Yeah, so I was really, really delighted to be contacted by Dr. Youssef and leading the way to come in for basically a weekend for 2 days and preach the gospel, but also mobilize believers to share the gospel in the city of Boston. And so very excited about that. And again, as one who has profited from the ministry to now be able to host and to bless the city. So it's very exciting.
It's such a great full circle. And, whenever Dad goes and does these events, it's never to draw people to himself. It's always to draw people into the church, right? You want to see seeds go out, faith responds, and then show people that there's a place to belong, to come to, because he's going to go back to Atlanta and he's going to leave. You can't attach yourself to him. You need to attach yourself to Christ and find a community that's near you that can feed you and disciple you and pour into you. And so, the hope will be that people will realize, just as you said, gosh, this is a beautiful building. I didn't realize what was inside, and find vibrancy and faith within its walls. So that event's October 24th and 25th at the Tremont Temple in Boston. Mac Powell will be providing music and a message from Dr. Youssef on the 25th. Jaime, what else? What's on your heart?
Yeah, I've been preaching Luke's gospel and thinking a lot about the unlikely coming into the kingdom. It's been a beautiful thing to be immersed in for the last year in Luke, and take a few breaks. We'll preach a few Psalms, but get right back into Luke. Yeah. And just want to say that I'm just overwhelmed to be able to walk with Jesus and tell others about him and how unlikely a convert that I was. Yeah. And, just trying to live my life every day, walking in that humility. Mm. And, it's a joy to think on those things.
Yeah. When the Son of Man is lifted up, he draws all men to himself. And so we rejoice in the work that the Lord has done in your life and in the work that he'll continue to do in and through you and through the church, Tremont Temple, and the congregation that you have there. And so, Jaime, it's been such a pleasure to have this time to meet with you. And we're praying for the event in October and for all the things leading up to those points. And we're just grateful for you to take the time to talk with us on Candid Conversations.
Well, thanks for having me, Jonathan. It was a pleasure. And I hope all blessings on apostles and the ministry of leading the way.
Thanks, brother. God bless.
You too.
Candid is a podcast from Leading the Way with Dr. Michael Youssef. Don't forget to connect with our social media pages on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. And subscribe to Candid Conversations on your favorite podcast platform so you never miss an episode. While there, please leave a review. It does help people find us. As always, thank you for listening to and sharing this episode.